Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Norway Chess 2023. Norway Chess is every single year one of the strongest chess tournaments that exists, where they invite players like Magnus Carlsen, and basically they go down the list of the top 10 players and they invite everybody that's available. This year we have players like Fabiano Caruana, as you see on the screen. They actually played in the first round. Hikaru Nakamura. They always invite Ariantari as well, as he's the second-ranked player in Norway, and given that it's called Norway Chess, they would like to give Ariantari an opportunity to play the top 10 players in the world. And the format of Norway Chess is very unique. So every round, the players do play a classical game of chess against each other, but if the game ends in a draw, they then come back and they play an Armageddon, where the person who had white gets 10 minutes, the person who played black gets 7, and then if black makes a draw, that counts as a win. Okay. All right. Let's do that, you know. The scoring system is 3 points for winning in classical chess, and then winning in the Armageddon is 1.5. And you know, we'll get into all that as the tournament progresses. We had some very interesting games on day number 1, including some really shocking results. And every round I will be making recaps for you. This round is obviously no exception. Let's begin. My first appetizer game that I will be serving you, your hors d'oeuvre, if you will, is the Armageddon game between Shahryar Mamedyarov and Ariantari. They made it to Armageddon because their classical game ended in a draw. So the Armageddon begins, and as you can see, it's 10 minutes for white, 7 minutes for black. Black has draw odds, so a draw is a win for black, which is a pretty significant advantage. We have knight f3. We have a relatively normal-looking opening, and then, in this position, Shahryar Mamedyarov plays the move g4. This is a very wild gambit. Tari probably shouldn't have rushed. He probably should have played c5 and stuck around in the center, because now this has a little bit less oomph. It has a little bit less oomph because you could take g7, make no mistake, but at least your king is not castled there. So g4 is a really wild move. And obviously, it's too dangerous for black to capture, because if you do capture like this, then white is simply going to play rook g1 and have a very powerful attack, which is why that's exactly what Ariantari does. Ariantari basically just calls the bluff here. He's like, I think that g4 is a stupid move. I think you're being overly ambitious, and I actually don't believe in this attack whatsoever, because I'm going to play f5. And then if you play h3, I'm going to go back. And I just don't believe in this. And neither does the computer. Neither does the computer. Mamedyarov now plays knight c3 and basically just tries to act like he did not just give away a pawn on g4. Mamedyarov is essentially just like, I'm going to develop all of my pieces. However, I will lack a g-pawn, and instead of a g-pawn, I will have a rook on g1, which is just sort of a constant reminder that if you mess with me, I will punch you in the face, which is a pretty good way to just live life. c6 from Tari. He has a very strong central setup. We have d4, we have a5, as Tari sends a warning shot down the other way, like, if you castle that way, I will attack you. And that warning shot clearly works, because in this position, Mamedyarov castles directly into that warning shot and says, if you mess with me, I will punch you in the face. I don't think he's saying this to Tari as the game is going on, but I have no evidence to the contrary. Knight to d7, king to b1, which is just always a useful move. It gets the king off of this diagonal, it gets the king off the c file, it defends a2. King h8, h3. By the way, the travel setup will be gone tomorrow. We'll be back to my normal setup. And now we see Mamedyarov trying to, in fact, utilize that open g file. Knight to f7 is, in fact, fighting for g5 and also e5. Mamedyarov plays knight e2, and we see Tari doing exactly what he said he would do on the queen side. But it is Mamedyarov who is, in fact, asking some questions. You will notice, or maybe you didn't notice, and now I will draw your attention to the fact that Mamedyarov is no longer up 3 minutes. In fact, well, before that last move, he was only up about a 120. So he's lost over half of his time advantage. But now Tari spends a considerable amount of time and plays the move queen to a5 with various attacking ideas over here. Mamedyarov has no plans of stopping. Knight to g5. The horses have arrived and they are pissed. They have not been fed in a very long time. Knight to h6, pawn to f3, simultaneously winning equity in the center and opening the door for the queen to rotate over to g2 and do some damage. Here comes Ari and Tari. Mamedyarov locking the queen side, making sure no pawn trades are possible, because if you do in fact open up the queen side, black is very quick, and look what one pawn trade does to the evaluation. But Mamedyarov, pawn to c5, b4, and brings the queen. Why does he bring the queen? Because he ain't afraid of no queen a2 check. Why is he not afraid of no queen a2 check? Because the king is brave. The king goes to c2, and it is actually the queen that has wandered in a little bit too far. And Tari plays the move rook e7. And on rook a1, he parts ways with the queen. He now has a rook and a bishop for the queen, and yes, admittedly, he is in fact threatening rook a2 check. But Mamedyarov is not in the business of losing his queen. If black could play rook a7, that would be wonderful. Like if black had this move, for example, he would be winning, but he doesn't. So he has to back out of the position. Now we have knight f6 and bishop d3. And Mamedyarov still has all the benefits of his position, and he has an extra queen. And he is just going to play bishop d3. He will prevent this with playing bishop to b1, and the attack will continue. Mamedyarov plays queen d2, takes the pawn on b4. Tari's defenses over here are dwindling. A rook trade secures more or less the victory, because to fight successfully against the queen, you need a lot of soldiers. You need rooks, you need knights, you need bishops. Once you lose the two rooks, the rook needs help. Rook ain't got help. And Mamedyarov uses the threat of the constant attack to get this down into an endgame where he is completely winning due to his passed pawns. And queen e4, c6, there's just absolutely nothing to be done. Queen e7 is a beautiful final move, sacrificing the queen. Yes, you can make a queen, but I think Mamedyarov would have promoted to a knight. So Mamedyarov wins in the Armageddon. A very, very fun game where he waited for his opponent to castle and sacrificed the g-pawn. Maybe you guys can play like Mamedyarov. Now, there was a game decided in the classical portion, all right? This was Firouzja versus Gukesh, two of the young superstars of the tournament, and they went directly into the Italian. Now, Ali Reza is originally from Iran, but he lives in France, and he loves the Italian. And they're saying right now that actually Ali Reza, despite having the fastest rise to 2800 of any person who has ever existed on planet Earth, Ali Reza is more interested in fashion. I mean, what a flex. Like, imagine being like the LeBron James level prospect of chess. Like, LeBron was sought after by everybody, high school prospect, never went to college, lived up to all the hype. Ali Reza is that for chess. Now, imagine you are that for chess, and then you step away and you're doing fashion in France. I mean, it's incredible stuff, but he loves the Italian, and he's really good at it. Plays d3, plays c3 a little bit later with ideas of d4, with ideas of b4. The Italian is very subtle opening, you know, hints of flavor and so on and so forth. Knight to f1, rotating the knight over this way with the potential to expand on the queen side if he really wants it. But it is actually Gukesh who is sort of restricting that area of the board. As you can see from the time spent by the players, both of them have all of this in their preparation. They are not thinking on their own whatsoever yet. Firouzja plays bishop b5. He is now, in fact, thinking on his own. a3, clearly Gukesh is still not. Clearly Gukesh is still not. Bishop going back to c4 now after 11 minutes of thought. Not the most accurate move, but it's time for Gukesh to think, surely. He spends 4 minutes. I don't think he's thinking. I think Gukesh is still very familiar with the plans of the position. He puts his knight on g6 after some 5 minutes of thought, and he has a 17-minute time advantage. It's a very, very close position, very locked position. There's no pawn breaks in the position. So Gukesh decides, I'm going to play c6, and I'm going to play d5. And I'm going to make a pawn break in the position. A very interesting moment. Firouzja can take, he can also play no less than like 8 different moves. The computer likes c4 with the idea of c5. The computer likes c4 with the idea of cd. The computer likes queen c2 and bishop d2. It likes a lot of different things. Computer doesn't really like bishop e3, but it doesn't mind the move bishop e3. I mean, short of white, like hanging a queen somehow, I mean, you could probably even get away with queen e2. Firouzja plays ed, okay? Now, Gukesh plays knight d5. He plays knight d5 because I think he kind of has a long-term prospect of not wanting to take back with the pawn. I mean, you can, but I kind of think that he would enjoy taking back with the queen potentially. So, Knight d5 keeps the center more open. The queen now has opportunities to pressure d3. Firouzja plays bishop d2, defending the pawn on c3, and goes knight h5. And it's very clear from Firouzja's last couple of moves that, you know, he's taking over, okay? He has outmaneuvered Gukesh. The last few decisions were maybe a little bit dubious. d4, good pressure. c4 ideas. Bishop staring down over there. Knight just... This knight is just sort of hanging out on h5, like causing problems. It's like the kind of crazy person that's like always outside of your apartment building. And this is very much a New York thing. And it's like, they're going to yell at me, you know. But maybe if they know I'm a local, they'll leave me alone. E takes d4. And in this position, knight takes d4 is an extremely natural move. But here the computer finds... Bishop h6. The idea simply of bishop h6 is that if you take back, queen d4, and like mate is shockingly difficult to stop. In fact, it's so shockingly difficult to stop, you cannot stop it. So I would just sacrifice my rook or even take the knight and queen e5, and very, very bad stuff is coming. So the best move after bishop h6 is actually for black to maybe take on c3, or maybe to take on f4. And after knight c3, just queen d2. And apparently, you know, bishop g7, queen h6 is coming. Bishop takes h6 is an amazing, amazing move. But as you see from Firouzja's time, he only spent about 20 seconds on the move knight takes d4. So either he already decided bishop takes h6 doesn't work, or he never even considered it, which is fascinating. Fascinating idea. Bishop h6, gh6, queen d4, and just go for mate. Now, certainly he saw that, but he probably rejected this because of some knight f4 and head-spinning complications, as basically every piece in this position is staring at one another. And it's not to say, by the way, that after something like this, bishop b3, queen b3, bishop f4, or even knight f4, like, nobody is saying that this position is guaranteed better for white. Knight takes d4, knight back to g3, preventing mate. It's a very, very tense position. Firouzja grabs the bishop, activates his queen, and here, visually speaking, after something like knight e5, I really like white's position. I like his position because of the bishop. I like his position because of the pressure of the queen, not on the queen, but on the pawn. This pawn is also kind of stupid looking. I don't really understand what that pawn on a3 is doing. It seems like black's position is really, after some accurate moves, just completely on the verge of collapse. But it's actually not so simple. Queen e2, and now absolute chaos ensues. In this position, Gukesh plays knight takes b4. Sacrificing his knight, but with the idea to take this bishop. Firouzja now finds a brilliant move in response. Bishop g5. That is a sensational move. What is it? Bishop g5 is something that we refer to as a desperado. A desperado is not a full blunder of a bishop. That's what you do. A desperado is when you know you're going to lose a piece, like this, but you sacrifice the piece to gain some sort of quick advantage or long-term advantage, and then you make the obvious recapture. So rather than taking this, first we give up the bishop, like this. Now we are damaging black's structure, and now cb4. Gukesh now plays g6, which is a really weird move. And it's basically just preventing anything from going to h5. Alireza plays rook d1, giving up yet another queenside pawn. So he is now down 2 pawns, but he is not worse. He is not worse, and he can take back one of them immediately. He can also play knight e4, but he has no way in. So he goes here, king h8, and now rook b1. And it looks like Alireza would like his investment back right now. All right, Alireza doesn't like the fluctuation of this chess stock market. He wants to cash out immediately, and he gets the pawn back right away. Here's the problem: knight d3. The queen defends the bishop, and these two are coming down this way. The knight hits everybody as well. It's a very unpleasant position. And look at Firouzja's time. Can we back up for a moment? Alireza Firouzja in this position spent 20 minutes. He had 22 minutes to make 12 moves. He now has 148. Now, look, I'm not a rocket scientist. That does not look very sophisticated of a time management decision. And Firouzja just... The game spins out of control. He just gets absolutely torn apart. And he ends the game with a2 being a massive weakness, but it's worse than that. It's the point that anywhere the king moves, a fork is coming. So king f3, there is some queen f4 stuff with the rook. If king h1, there's queen e1. And the bishop falls, and Gukesh beats Firouzja. Gukesh beats a 27-85. 3 points for Gukesh. Massive. The next one I have for you, Wesley So, Hikaru Nakamura. It's the age-old tale. Their classical game was, in fact, a draw. Their Armageddon game was sensational. It's now time for the main course. We have an Italian. We have an Italian different to the last one. Here, Hikaru is the one asking questions, and he plays King H8 with the idea of playing F5 in the future, and he will probably play that move. Knight G4, King H8, set up this move by unpinning the king. Knight rotates back to H6. Hikaru plays Queen F6 and Knight back to G8, and it's just a matter of time. He's just got to make a few more preparations. There it is. F5 played. Now, look at the time. Keep in mind that the game starts 10 minutes for white and 7 minutes for black. And it's 5-4. And I got news for you, folks. It ain't getting any better. EF5, bishop F5. Wesley grabs the bishop pair, but Wesley spends 40% of his time on a backwards bishop move. Not only was that move a poor investment of time, percentage-wise, it was also not a good move. 40% of his time. Now, he could have played bishop F5, he could have played rook C1, he could have played queen G4. Here's the problem. White cannot make a draw in the Armageddon because white loses the Armageddon, right? So white is playing for a win. That is why Wesley plays a move, and frequently grandmasters will play moves in Armageddon that might not necessarily be the best, but they keep attention. And if you take on E3, for example, I will go here and even try to checkmate you. For example, ED, Queen D3. It's a very, very powerful Zwischenzug, and now this bishop is out and that pawn is very weak. So, E takes D4 played, we have pawn takes, and a massive exchange begins. But wait a minute. Hikaru takes. Hikaru in this position could have taken with the knight. He could have taken with the knight, and he could have went for something that looks like this, which is probably unlosable. Now, he decides to do it this way. Taking first with the bishop. Suddenly, bishop takes F5. And Hikaru could go here with this hanging and this hanging, but he decides to go check. Wesley plays F4, check, G3, and now Hikaru doesn't have enough time to win the bishop, so he does this. And he's got 6 pawns to Wesley's 3, and a very weak king, a king that's on the verge of getting mated. But Queen D2, and the king is safe, and Rook F3 is very aggressive, but Queen G2, and Queen F6. A fascinating position. 2 of the best players in the world have 2 minutes, and Wesley is playing for a win because he has an extra knight, but Hikaru has 6 pawns. So who is really playing for a win? All right, I mean, I don't know. My head is spinning. This is a very, very complicated position. A rook trade. Now King H1. Now Hikaru plays C6. He could have also played something like Rook F... That's not what he could have played. He could have played Rook F8, because after something like Queen takes B7, it's actually Queen E3, and it's Hikaru who is completely calling the shots. I mean, if one king is weak here, it's Wesley's. So that doesn't happen. He plays C6 and then plays a little bit defensively, and we get this endgame. 1 minute each per player. On the 40th move, they gain an extra second. Good news is now both sides have made 40 moves, and each of them will have an extra second. Only Wesley is playing this for a win. Now, how do you get this down closer and closer to a drawn endgame? For black, you got to trade the pawns. With no pawns, white can't win. The only chance white has of winning this endgame, without black having a heart attack, God forbid, or, I don't know, falling asleep and losing on time, is for white to win all of black's pawns and then promote. Rook E7. Hikaru comes with the pawns. Here's C5, here's Rook E3. We have 1 trade. Now, Hikaru needs to trade 2 more pawns. C4, C3, B4. That's it. Hikaru's got to secure it, right? Here comes the king. Wait a minute. G5. Suddenly, Hikaru's got no way to protect his pawn on B4. Whoa. No time on the clock. He ends up playing C2 and B3. Now, Hikaru's chopped down the whole side, but it's a 2-on-1. It's a 2-on-1, knight D4, and Hikaru could prevent Rook C6, but Rook B4 is also a nice move. He goes back to B6. Now, Stockfish is convinced this is holdable, but after Rook C6, I'm not so sure you can trade, but maybe you can. Is this a draw for black? I don't think so. Right, he plays Rook B4, targeting the knight. Now we have Knight F5, and in this position, Hikaru just has to cold-blooded play h5. Because after rook g6 check, king f7, rook g5, there's this. And this looks like it's winning for white. It ain't. That's a cold shower. You could play knight g3, but rook b2 check. And it's a draw. Because if the king ever goes there, and something like king f4, oops, the rook guards the knight. So Hikaru's last chance is h5, but with 5 seconds on the clock, Wesley's king marches up, king g5, and there are checkmating possibilities, and disaster strikes as Hikaru loses both pawns. And like I told you in the very beginning, the only chance that Wesley has of winning this game is with the pawn, and Wesley wins the Armageddon as Hikaru resigns on move 68. Crazy, crazy stuff. But if you had the patience to watch 20 minutes, or maybe you skipped ahead to the Magnus game, nothing can prepare you for what you're about to see. This is a rematch of a World Championship match from 2018, played in London between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen. And Magnus plays e6, the French defense. We got a Italian-American, we got a Norwegian, we got a French on the board, and they have history in England. Isn't chess such a beautiful global game? And some idiot is making a video about this in New York. Idea, obviously, d5. These two played the Sicilian defense and paved so much new opening theory in 2018. But we have a French. Knight c3 is the classical variation. Now taking here would be entering the Rubinstein potentially. Knight f6 is the classical French. And bishop b4 is the Wiener, but it's very dicey playing this. Knight f6 played. e5 is the main line. Knight d7, f4. Big boy center here from Fabiano Caruana. All of this has been seen before, and now black chooses. Sometimes black plays queen b6 and goes for this. Sometimes black plays bishop e7 and castle. Sometimes black takes on d4 and puts something on c5. Sometimes black plays b6, bishop b7. Sometimes black plays a6, b5, a6. Fabiano spends a couple of minutes here and plays knight e2. It's not the main line. I think queen d2 is a very, very committal move here that's kind of considered main line, sort of threatening this. You can also play a3 in some positions. Knight e2 is a very clear indication that Fabiano has no plans to castle queenside. Why? Because after queen b6, what do? You play b3, you're opening up the diagonal. If you play rook b1, you're definitely not castling queenside. Queen d2 is an indication that you have plans of castling queenside. Then after something like b5 castles, you know, there's some unpleasant things that can happen here. You have to be careful with white. You have to make a few preparation moves. So knight e2, queen c1, and Fabiano is just trying to build a big pawn wall. That is sort of his idea. Now, as you can see from Fabiano's time management, he did not expect the French defense from Magnus, but Fabi knows literally every opening, so he clearly has something there. And now g3. Now, this is the first time in the game that Fabi spent quite a bit amount of time. It's not because he didn't really know the opening, it's because he's deciding what to do. The players are sort of now entering deep territories, like pawn takes c5 is some move, and there might be other plans, but he does in fact play g3 and now f6. So Magnus is threatening the integrity of the white center here. He has achieved both c5 and f6, which are critical pawn breaks in the French defense, and it's up to Fabiano to decide what to do. He can take one, he can take both, he can take the other one, but not take the other one, or he do nothing. He chooses do nothing. And once again, he spends quite a bit of time. 25 minutes went by. Now, here Fabiano considered ef6, he considered dc5, he considered one and then the other, or maybe one and then not the other, you know, he considered... my dog is exiting the room, as you can see. He is really, really unhappy with the French defense on the board. He also definitely considered bishop h3, which is just a very clear and violent attack on black. And then he had to calculate cd4 and fe5 and all these lines, as well as f5. But Fabiano chooses bishop g2 and basically says, look, Magnus, you decide. And now Magnus spends 7 minutes, takes in the center, and this pawn structure, as you get better and better at the game of chess, you're going to realize that a trade is not just stopping at one pawn, equal trade. Things happen, all right? That trade opens the c file. It also relinquishes defensive b4 and some queenside stuff. So here comes queen a5 check. Now, Fabiano can block this with the knight, with the bishop, with the other knight. He could also move his king. He should not do this because it would lose him a queen. Okay? So he plays here. Now that move destabilizes these squares, but still gets the knight back into the game. Now here comes knight b6 from Magnus. Now actually Magnus has evened out the clock with Fabiano, and he has knight c4 in his mind. Fabi now no longer wants Magnus to have this possibility, so he decides to take on f6. Why does Fabiano take on f6 right now? Because Magnus's options are limited. They're limited. He can now no longer take with the knight. Like, for instance, in this position, Fabiano probably would not have gone here. Why? Because of knight f6. So when Magnus committed the knight to the queen side, Fabi decided to capture because Magnus's options are to take with two pieces that have no real role in the game, or to take with the g-pawn to try to play e5, but simultaneously weaken the king and block the pieces and create your, an isolated pawn for yourself. So bishop f6. And now b3. b3 is a very high-level move, which is why Fabi spent some time on it. It prevents this knight from coming forward at the cost of weakening dark squares. Right, so at the cost of weakening some dark squares, which is why bishop d7 and rook c8 are now on the mind of Magnus. And Fabi just says, I'm not concerned. I knew that that was going to be your move. I even knew that this was going to be your move, and I got news for you, queen d2. Okay, so you made a bunch of moves that improve your position. Now what? Magnus says, you know what? You're right. Bishop b7. I'm rerouting my bishop to this side of the board. I no longer think that the target should be on d4. Fascinating position. What now? This is like middle games 101. What now? How do you got no checks, you got no captures that make any sense, you got no attacking moves. What do you do in this position? Like, how do you actually play chess, right? Well, chess is a constant loop of having an idea, evaluating the quality of the idea based on the multitude of opponents' responses to that idea, returning to the idea and either tweaking it a little bit or discarding it constantly. This is how chess players think. Idea 1, idea 2, idea 3. Depending on how many responses the opponent has to that idea, you can reject it or you can work on it. For example, I have an idea to play knight takes d5. I can reject that very quickly for the fact that it loses a knight 3 different ways, right? But how about knight e2? Is this queen trade beneficial for white? Why or why not? Well, Fabiano clearly took 20 minutes here, so he knew what he was doing. And the other question is, what if there is no queen trade? What if the queen, slides forward, or the bishop comes here, or something else comes here? Magnus, after thinking for 5 minutes, decides to capture. Bishop takes d2 from Fabi. And now, rook c7. Very clear what he wants. It's to double up and go over here. So Fabi meets him on the c file, rook fc8. But now Fabi gets a little something. And it's the fact that this rook right now is stuck. So Fabi plays f5. And suddenly Magnus's position is under some questions. Point is, the bishop can go to f4. The move f5 is called a clearance move. It's called a clearance sacrifice. You're sacrificing a material to free up a square. Magnus responds virtually immediately with counterattacking measures, and what he's trying to do here is not just hope that Fabiano sees the rook hanging like you, doesn't see the rook hanging like you would. It's trying to get the rook off of a stable square. If the rook goes here, nothing is guarding it. Tricks are possible. You take the rook, I take with check first. You take this, I take the rook. So Fabi just says, okay. You still can't really take this, Magnus, because I'm going to trap your rook. Well, Magnus goes back to b4. And this move doesn't let the bishop move because of the rook. Oh, we have take, take. It seems like after some nagging, Magnus has figured out the position. But he hasn't. He hasn't. You see, the current position that we have, the quality of these pieces, were all determined by the opening and the decisions that the players have made over the last some 15 moves. And the verdict is this knight is too slow. This knight is far useful. It's not that useful. These pieces are a lot faster. Knight f4 and peekaboo, two things see the bishop. Now, knight e5 gallops in and pressure on d5. Black does not have the time or luxury to take this because their position completely disintegrates. So, knight e5. The computer in this position really liked rook e5. But knight e5 played by Fabi. He is utilizing all 5 of his pieces. He has targets. Magnus plays g6, and Fabi plays g4. Fabi's position is so beautifully coordinated here that every move Magnus's position hangs on a knife's edge. Bishop e4 is the only move now. Basically saying, look, I'm happy chucking a pawn. Take. I'm happy chucking a pawn. I might win one back here. And as you try to advance into my position, maybe I'm going to trade the rooks off. Fabi in this position, very cool, calm, collected. A3. He could have also, according to the computer, played G5, which is a disgusting move, and the point is just restricting the position. But he plays A3. Magnus plays knight back to D5. We have rook E4. And in this position, Magnus needed to play either rook C1, trying to trade the rooks and neutralize the white position, trade knights, replace the knight in the center, welcome in this attack, and maybe play rook C2 and get a counterattack of his own. But Magnus needed to relinquish some pressure. He could not allow Fabi to keep all his pieces on the board. He needed to trade knights or trade rooks before engaging in further endgame battle. He played rook C3, and he played rook C3 pretty quickly. And suddenly, the hammer came with knight D7. Magnus did not quickly enough trade the pieces of Fabiano. And all of a sudden, there are massive existential problems to the position. If you take the knight, I take this knight, I hit the rook, I threaten this, the game is over. If you take this knight, I give you a check first, then I recapture, and then I continue my attack. Now, still white is better, but after rook c1, black is trying to hold. White is better for sure. But in the game, Magnus went here. And now, knight d5, and a very simple rook e5. What's so simple? I don't understand. The knight just... So what? Knight f6 check. Knight f6 check. And Magnus resigned because if something like king g7, white is just completely winning here. White has a red carpet pawn to the end of the board. White also has g5 and rook e7 and just a bulldozer on the 7th rank. And Magnus decided, I'm not even going to play this on. After something like d5, if you try to stop the knight, rook e7 check, d6 ideas, it's game over. Fabiano Caruana takes down Magnus Carlsen in classical. And after one round, he leads the field. 3-0 for Fabi. We see all the other games that were decided in classical at the top. And then we see the 3 decided in the Armageddon. So, welcome to Norway Chess. Hikaru and Magnus both losing in the same recap. It's going to be a fun tournament. Now get out of here.